Nobody talks about the birthdays that disappear. The ones with no balloons. No candles. No messages waiting on your phone when you wake up. The kind of birthdays that arrive quietly and leave exactly the same way. I turned 27 on a cold Thursday morning in Manhattan. The city outside my apartment window was already awake. Horns echoed between buildings. Delivery trucks rattled down the street. People hurried toward offices carrying coffee cups and unfinished conversations. The world kept moving. It always did. I lay in bed for a few extra seconds staring at the ceiling. My phone sat on the nightstand beside me. Silent. No messages. No missed calls. No notifications. The battery still showed 100% because nobody had given it a reason to work. I smiled anyway. Not because I felt happy. Because disappointment is easier to carry when you pretend it does not exist. After a quick shower, I pulled on my uniform and left for work. The coffee shop sat on a busy corner in Midtown. It was the kind of place where people stopped for 5 minutes and then forgot it existed. For me, it was where I spent most of my life. The moment I stepped inside, the smell of coffee beans and fresh pastries wrapped around me. My manager waved from behind the counter. "Morning, Emily." "Morning." Nothing else. No birthday wishes. No surprise. No acknowledgement. I was not upset. At least that was what I told myself. Most people did not know the date. Why would they? Life was busy. Rent was expensive. Everyone had their own problems. Still, a small part of me hoped somebody might remember. The morning rush arrived exactly at 7. Business executives. Tourists. Students. Construction workers. One customer after another. I smiled. Took orders. Handed out drinks. Repeated the same greetings hundreds of times. "Good morning. Have a great day. Your latte is ready." By noon my feet already hurt. By 3 o'clock I had barely sat down once. During my break, I stepped outside with a sandwich and checked my phone. 2 emails. 1 advertisement. 1 utility bill reminder. Nothing else. I laughed softly to myself. Even the algorithm forgot my birthday. The afternoon passed. Slowly. Outside, gray clouds rolled across the skyline. Inside, customers continued flowing through the doors. Some looked exhausted. Some looked excited. Some barely looked at me at all. I wondered how many birthdays I had unknowingly served over the years. How many people were celebrating while I filled coffee cups and cleaned tables. Around 6 in the evening, my coworker Sarah joined me near the espresso machine. "Any plans tonight?" she asked. "Work until closing." She frowned. "Seriously?" I shrugged. "Bills do not care what day it is." Sarah stared at me for a second before her eyes widened. "Wait." My stomach tightened slightly. "What?" "Today is your birthday." I gave her a small smile. "You remembered." "Emily." Her expression softened. "Why are you here?" I glanced around the crowded coffee shop. "Because rent is due next week." Sarah looked like she wanted to say something else. Instead, she quietly squeezed my shoulder and returned to work. The conversation lasted less than 30 seconds. Yet somehow it became the most personal moment of my entire day. Night settled over Manhattan. The windows reflected city lights and passing headlights. Customers came and went. Hours disappeared. My birthday slipped quietly toward midnight. I did not know it then, but somewhere inside that crowded coffee shop, a man sitting alone had just overheard a single sentence. And before the night was over, that sentence would change everything. Sometimes the loneliest part of a difficult day is realizing nobody notices you are having one. After Sarah returned to work, I tried to focus on the endless stream of customers moving through the coffee shop. Orders appeared on the screen faster than we could complete them. Espresso machines hissed constantly. Conversations blended together into a wall of noise. Under normal circumstances, the chaos helped pass the time. Tonight it only made me feel invisible. Around 7 o'clock, a black luxury sedan stopped outside the front windows. I barely noticed it at first. Cars came and went all day. But several people inside the cafe glanced toward the street. A few seconds later, the front door opened. 3 men entered. 2 wore dark suits and immediately moved toward a table near the back. The third walked in behind them. Tall, broad shoulders, dark hair, perfectly tailored black coat. The kind of man who seemed completely comfortable wherever he stood. He looked to be in his early 40s. Calm, controlled, confident without trying. I did not know his name. At that moment he was simply another customer. One who happened to attract attention without speaking a word. He took a corner booth facing the room. The other two men sat nearby, discussing documents spread across the table. Business meeting, I assumed. I grabbed a menu and approached. Good evening. Can I get you something to drink? The man looked up from his phone. His eyes were darker than I expected. Focused. Observant. Black coffee, he said. His voice was low and steady. Anything else? That will be all. I nodded and headed back toward the counter. A few minutes later I delivered the coffee. He thanked me politely. Not unusual. Yet somehow different. Most customers barely looked at me. This man did. Not in an uncomfortable way. Simply as if he actually saw the person standing in front of him. The evening continued. I carried trays. Refilled cups. Cleaned tables. Every time I glanced toward the corner booth, the meeting continued. Papers changed hands.
Phones rang.
Conversations remained quiet. The man seemed completely focused on business. Then something happened. A customer accidentally spilled an entire iced drink near the entrance. The cup hit the floor. Ice scattered everywhere. Several people stepped around the mess and kept walking. I immediately grabbed towels and crouched down to clean it. Before I could finish, an elderly woman carrying shopping bags nearly slipped. I reached out and steadied her. Careful. She smiled gratefully. Thank you, dear. Of course. Once she was safe, I returned to cleaning. By the time I stood again, my back ached. My uniform was damp. My break had disappeared. Yet the woman left smiling. Somehow that felt worth it. What I did not realize was that someone had been watching the entire interaction. Back at the corner booth, the man lowered his coffee cup and followed me with his. Eyes for a moment. Not because I was extraordinary, but as I was ordinary. And because people rarely stopped to help when they had no reason to. An hour later, Sarah joined me at the register. The line had finally shortened. You should go home after your shift, she whispered. Get some rest. I laughed softly. That sounds expensive. She shook her head. Then, forgetting herself, she said something that carried farther than either of us intended. Nobody should spend their birthday working until midnight. The words hung in the air. My smile faded slightly. Across the room, the man in the corner booth looked up. For the first time all evening, his attention shifted completely away from business. His eyes moved toward me, then toward Sarah, then back to me again. I looked away first. Embarrassed. The last thing I wanted was sympathy from strangers. Yet something had changed. I could feel it. Not because anyone celebrated my birthday. Not because the night suddenly became special. Because somewhere in that crowded coffee shop, a man who had never met me before was no longer seeing a waitress carrying coffee. He was seeing a story. And he had just become curious enough to learn the rest of it. There is a certain kind of sadness that arrives when people celebrate everyone except the person standing right in front of them. The hours after Sarah's comment passed slowly. Every time I walked through the coffee shop, I could feel the weight of those words lingering in the air. Nobody should spend their birthday working until midnight. She was right. But life did not always care about what people deserved. Life cared about rent, utility bills, grocery receipts, medical expenses, things that never disappeared just because a calendar happened to mark a special date. By 8:30, the dinner rush had begun. The line stretched nearly to the front door. Orders piled up. Names were called. Cups moved across counters in endless waves. I stayed busy because staying busy was easier than thinking. Yet every now and then I noticed the man in the corner booth. His meeting had ended nearly an hour earlier. The other men were gone. The documents had disappeared. But he remained. A fresh cup of coffee sat in front of him, untouched. He seemed less interested in the drink than in observing the room around him. At one point, a young mother entered carrying a sleeping toddler. She looked exhausted. One hand balanced a diaper bag while the other pushed a stroller through the crowded space. Before she reached the counter, a customer accidentally stepped in front of her. The stroller wheel caught on a chair leg. The woman nearly lost her balance. Instinctively, I moved around the register and helped steady the stroller. I have it, I said. Relief flooded her face. Thank you. No problem. A few minutes later, I carried her order directly to her table so she would not have to juggle everything alone. The gratitude in her eyes felt far more valuable than any tip. Across the room, the man watched quietly. Not staring. Observing. The way someone studies details other people miss. Later, an elderly customer discovered she had forgotten her wallet. Embarrassment immediately filled her face. Before she could leave, I quietly paid for her coffee myself. It cost less than $5. Hardly a fortune. But the woman smiled as though I had given her something priceless. That is very kind of you, she said. Everyone deserves coffee on a cold night. She laughed softly and squeezed my hand before leaving. I returned to work without thinking much about it. Kindness had never felt extraordinary to me. It was simply easier than indifference. By 10:30, the crowd finally thinned. Chairs were being stacked. Floors were being cleaned. The city outside had transformed into a sea of lights reflecting against dark glass buildings. I was wiping down a table when the man approached the counter for the first time since ordering his coffee. Up close, he seemed even more composed. Expensive watch. Impeccable coat. Calm expression. Another coffee? I asked. A faint smile touched his face. No. His eyes drifted briefly toward the empty tables. You have been busy. I laughed softly. That is one way to describe it. He glanced toward the clock. Long day. The question felt simple, yet somehow genuine. Very long. For a second it seemed like he wanted to ask something else. Instead he nodded. You handled it well. The compliment caught me off guard. Customers thanked me for drinks. Managers thanked me for shifts. Nobody ever thanked me for how I carried the day itself. Thank you, I said quietly. He reached into his pocket and placed cash on the counter. Far more than necessary for a cup of coffee. I immediately pushed most of it back. Sir, this is too much. He looked at the money, then at me. Keep it. I shook my head. I cannot. For the first time, surprise flickered across his face. As if people rarely refused him. After a moment, he accepted the returned bills. Then he gave a small nod and headed toward the door. I watched him leave. The black sedan waiting outside. The quiet confidence. The mystery. I assumed that would be the end of it. Another customer. Another night. Another forgotten birthday. What I did not know was that the man walking into the Manhattan night had just made a decision. And before sunrise arrived, that decision would begin changing both of our lives. The city looks different after midnight. The crowds disappear. The noise softens. Even Manhattan seems to breathe a little slower. My shift finally ended at 11:47. Not that I was counting. I finished cleaning the last table, clocked out, and stepped into the cold night air carrying the same worn handbag I had carried for years. My birthday had less than 15 minutes left. The realization made me smile. 27 had arrived and nearly disappeared without leaving much evidence behind. The sidewalks were quieter now. Streetlights reflected across damp pavement. A distant siren echoed somewhere beyond the buildings. I pulled my coat tighter and started the familiar walk home. A bakery near my apartment was still open. One of those small family-owned places that seemed determined to outlast every chain store in the city. Through the front window, I spotted a display case filled with cakes and pastries. Most people bought birthday cakes for parties, for family gatherings, for celebrations. I bought a single cupcake, vanilla frosting, blue sprinkles. The cashier wished me a good night. I thanked him and stepped back outside carrying the tiny white box. It weighed almost nothing, yet somehow it felt heavier than it should have. By the time I reached my apartment building, only 7 minutes remained before midnight. The hallway was quiet. The elevator groaned its way upward. Everything felt ordinary, predictable, familiar. Inside my apartment, I set the cupcake on the kitchen counter and switched on a small lamp. Warm light filled the room. The space was modest. One bedroom, small kitchen, old furniture. Nothing impressive, but it was mine. I stared at the cupcake for a moment before finding a single candle left over from years ago. After searching through drawers for a lighter, I finally managed to light it. The tiny flame flickered gently in the silence. For a few seconds I simply stood there watching it. No music. No friends. No celebration. Just one candle glowing in a small apartment while the city continued moving outside. I laughed softly at the absurdity of it all. Then I closed my eyes and made a wish. Not for money. Not for success. Not even for love. I wished that next year would feel different. Somehow. In some way I could not yet imagine. After blowing out the candle, I took a picture of the cupcake and sent it to my younger brother, Ryan. He lived 3 states away and worked 2 jobs of his own. A minute later my phone buzzed. Happy birthday. Sorry I forgot earlier. Love you. I smiled. It was late, but it still counted. Across the city, in a penthouse office overlooking Manhattan, another person had not forgotten. Dominic Moretti stood beside floor-to-ceiling windows with the skyline spread beneath him. The coffee shop receipt rested on his desk. Beside it sat a simple report containing information he had quietly requested only an hour earlier. Emily Carter, 27 years old. Works 6 days a week. Helps support her younger brother. No criminal record. No scandals. No hidden agenda. Just a woman carrying more responsibility than most people ever noticed. Dominic read the file once. Then again. Something about it bothered him. Not because of what it contained. Because of what it revealed. A person who spent her birthday serving strangers. A person who gave away kindness despite having so little herself. He looked toward the city lights beyond the glass. Somewhere among millions of people, Emily Carter was ending her birthday alone. For reasons he could not fully explain, that thought refused to leave him. And before the night was over, Dominic Moretti made a quiet decision. The next birthday Emily Carter celebrated would not look anything like this one. The people who ask for the least are often carrying the most. The morning after my birthday felt exactly like every other morning. My alarm rang at 6. I made coffee, checked my bank account, immediately regretted it. Then I got ready for another shift. Life moved forward without ceremony. The cupcake was gone. The candle was gone. The day was over. That was supposed to be the end of the story. At least that was what I believed. What I did not know was that somewhere across Manhattan, Dominic Moretti kept thinking about a woman he had only spoken to for a few minutes. The file on his desk remained there long after it should have been forgotten. Every detail seemed ordinary by itself. Together they painted a different picture. Emily Carter worked 6 days a week. Sometimes 7. She rarely took vacation days. She regularly transferred money to her younger brother Ryan. Her apartment lease consumed nearly half her income. She volunteered twice a month at a community reading program for children despite having almost no free time. Dominic had spent most of his life around people who wanted something. Money, influence, opportunity, favors. Yet the more he learned about Emily, the more unusual she seemed. Because nowhere in her story did she appear to be asking for anything at all. 3 days later, I finished an afternoon shift and headed across town to visit Ryan through a video call. His face appeared on my laptop screen from a small apartment hundreds of miles away. "You look tired," he said immediately. "Thank you. That is exactly what every woman wants to hear." He laughed. "You know what I mean." I did. Ryan always noticed things other people missed. We talked about work, bills, family, the usual subjects. Before ending the call, he became serious. "You should spend more time on yourself." I smiled. "I will add that to my schedule right after paying rent." He did not laugh this time. "I am serious, Emily." His voice softened. "You take care of everybody." I looked away from the screen for a moment. The truth was I did not know how to stop. Taking care of people had become a habit years ago. Maybe even a purpose. After the call ended, I sat alone in my apartment listening to the city outside. Sirens in the distance. Traffic below. Neighbors moving through hallways. Ordinary sounds. Yet Ryan's words stayed with me. The next afternoon brought another surprise. Near the end of my shift, a woman entered the coffee shop carrying a leather portfolio. She ordered tea and spent nearly an hour working at a table near the window. Eventually she approached the counter. "Excuse me," she said. "Are you Emily Carter?" My stomach tightened slightly. "Yes." She smiled. I attended a literacy fundraiser last year. You volunteered there. I vaguely remembered the event. I think so. You were wonderful with the children. She reached into her portfolio and handed me a business card. My company is expanding a community education program. We are looking for someone exactly like you. I stared at the card, then at her. I am not sure I am qualified. Actually, she said gently, I think you are more qualified than you realize. After she left, I looked at the card again. It felt unreal, unexpected, almost impossible. Across the city, Dominic sat in the back seat of a black sedan watching Manhattan pass beyond the window. His phone rested silently in his hand. A small smile appeared as he looked toward the skyline. Because for the first time in a very long time, helping someone felt more important than controlling anything. And neither of us realized that this was only the beginning. Sometimes life changes so quietly that you do not realize it until you look back and notice how far you have traveled. The business card stayed in my purse for 2 days before I finally called the number. I almost talked myself out of it several times. Opportunities like that did not usually appear in my life. They appeared in movies. They happened to other people. Yet every time I looked at the card, I remembered the woman's confidence. She had not sounded polite. She had sounded certain. By the following week, I found myself sitting inside a bright conference room overlooking Midtown Manhattan. The walls were covered with photographs of community programs, literacy projects, and educational events. Children smiled from nearly every frame. For the first time in a long while, I felt nervous in a way that had nothing to do with overdue bills. The interview lasted nearly an hour. We discussed books, volunteer work, education, community outreach, topics I genuinely cared about. The conversation felt less like an interview and more like a discussion between people trying to solve the same problem. When it ended, the director walked me to the elevator. Thank you for coming, Emily. I smiled. Thank you for inviting me. She hesitated for a second. You know, some people impress us with their resumes. I looked at her curiously. And some impress us with who they are. The elevator doors closed before I could think of a response. The words stayed with me all the way home. 3 days later, I received an email while standing behind the coffee shop register. I nearly dropped my phone when I read it. They were offering me a position, better salary, better hours, better benefits, a future that looked completely different from the one I had expected a month earlier. I read the message 3 times before believing it was real. Sarah noticed immediately. What happened? She asked. I handed her the phone. Her eyes widened. Then she wrapped her arms around me before I could react. Emily, this is amazing. For the first time in months, I felt something I had almost forgotten. Relief. Not complete relief, but enough to let me breathe a little easier. That evening I called Ryan. He practically shouted through the speaker. I knew it. You absolutely did not. Okay, I hoped it. We both laughed. The sound felt lighter than usual. Happier. After the call ended, I sat beside my apartment window watching the city lights appear one by one. The future suddenly looked larger, brighter. Yet another question quietly began growing in the back of my mind. Why had all of this happened so quickly? The opportunity, the timing, the perfect fit. Everything felt almost too fortunate. Across the city, Dominic Moretti sat alone in his office reviewing documents. One of his associates entered carrying a folder. The program hired her, the man said. Dominic nodded once. No celebration. No visible reaction. Yet after the door closed, he found himself staring out at the skyline again. The memory of a tired young woman serving coffee on her birthday returned unexpectedly. He remembered the way she helped strangers without hesitation. The way she refused extra money. The way she smiled even when nobody seemed to notice her. For reasons he still could not entirely explain, her success mattered to him. Back in my apartment, I closed my laptop and prepared for bed. My new job would begin soon. My life was changing. Everything should have felt simple. Instead, curiosity lingered. Because somewhere deep inside, I could not shake the feeling that an invisible hand had quietly opened a door. And I was beginning to wonder who had been standing on the other side. People often say that good things happen when you stop looking for them. What they never mention is how unsettling those good things can feel when they arrive too perfectly. My new position began 2 weeks later. The office was brighter than the coffee shop. Quieter too. Instead of espresso machines and crowded lines, there were meeting rooms, community projects, and people discussing ways to help others learn and grow. Every morning, I walked through the glass doors feeling grateful. Every evening, I left feeling useful. For the first time in years, I was building something instead of merely surviving. Yet the strange feeling never disappeared. Small coincidences kept appearing. During my first week, I learned that the woman who had originally recommended me had attended an event sponsored by a foundation I had never heard of before. During my second week, another colleague mentioned that several community programs had recently received funding from a private donor who preferred to remain anonymous. During my third week, I overheard a board member discussing how unusual it was that my application had been reviewed so quickly. None of those details proved anything. Separately, they meant very little. Together, they began forming a pattern. One rainy afternoon, I stayed late organizing materials for an upcoming literacy event. Most of the office had already gone home. The building was quiet except for the distant hum of air conditioning. While searching through old emails, I noticed a name attached to several project approvals. Not the donor. Not the sponsor. A legal representative. The name felt familiar. I stared at it for several seconds before realizing why. I had seen it on a business card months earlier. The card belonged to one of the men who had attended the coffee shop meeting with the mysterious customer in the corner booth. My heart skipped. Could have been coincidence. New York was full of coincidences. Yet for some reason I did not believe this one was. That night, I returned home and sat by my apartment window looking across the city lights. The memory of that evening in the coffee shop came back with surprising clarity. The black sedan. The calm voice. The unexpected conversation. The way he had looked at me after hearing it was my birthday. Dominic Moretti. I had learned his name weeks ago through casual office conversations and local business articles. It was difficult not to know who he was. What I could not understand was why someone like him would have any reason to think about someone like me. The question followed me for days. Eventually, curiosity became stronger than caution. One Saturday afternoon, I attended a charity event our organization was helping coordinate. Families filled the venue. Children moved between activity tables. Volunteers guided guests through the exhibits. Everything felt normal until I saw him standing across the room. Dominic. Dark suit. Calm expression. Surrounded by people who seemed eager for his attention. For a second, I considered turning around and leaving. Instead, I walked forward. The closer I got, the more certain I became. He noticed me before I reached him. A faint smile appeared. Not surprised. Almost as if he had expected this moment eventually. "Emily," he said. "Hello." I folded my arms lightly. "I think I have a question." His expression remained calm. "Only one." I laughed despite myself. Then my smile faded. "Did you have something to do with what happened after that night?" For the first time since meeting him, Dominic Moretti looked genuinely thoughtful. He glanced toward the crowd around us before returning his attention to me. And in that moment, I realized I was finally standing at the beginning of an answer I had been chasing for months. Sometimes the answers we chase are not nearly as complicated as the reasons we fear them. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The sounds of the charity event continued around us. Children laughed near the reading corner. Volunteers guided families between activity tables. Conversations drifted through the room like distant music. Yet somehow everything felt quieter than before. Dominic looked at me steadily. Not defensive. Not uncomfortable. Just thoughtful. Finally, he nodded once. "Yes." The single word landed harder than I expected. I stared at him. "How much?" His gaze remained calm. "Enough to open a door. Not enough to decide whether you walked through it." I folded my arms tighter. Part of me felt relieved. Another part felt frustrated. "Why?" He glanced toward the families gathered across the room. "Because I could." "That is not an answer." A faint smile touched his face before disappearing again. "No, it is not." For several seconds he seemed to search for the right words. Then he sighed quietly. "Do you remember that night at the coffee shop?" I laughed softly. It would be difficult to forget. I watched you spend an entire evening helping people. His voice remained low and steady. Customers, coworkers, strangers. You treated every person as if they mattered. I looked away. That is called being polite. No. His expression sharpened slightly. It is called caring. Most people stop doing that when life becomes difficult. The honesty in his voice caught me off guard. Dominic continued. Then I learned it was your birthday. I felt a strange tightness in my chest. He looked toward the window where sunlight spilled across the room. You spent that entire day taking care of everyone except yourself. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Around us, the event continued uninterrupted. Yet I suddenly felt transported back to that coffee shop. The long shift, the silence on my phone, the cupcake waiting in my apartment. Dominic shook his head slightly. I could not stop thinking about it. I stared at him. Because I worked on my birthday? Because nobody seemed to notice you were carrying so much. The answer was so simple that it left me speechless. No grand speech. No dramática explanación. Just the truth. Dominic had noticed something everyone else missed. I looked down at my hands. You did not even know me. That is true. Then why help? His smile returned, smaller this time. Almost sad. Because someone should have. The words settled between us. I felt my eyes sting unexpectedly. Not because of the opportunities. Not because of the job. Because for the first time somebody had acknowledged how hard everything had been. All the long shifts. The sacrifices. The responsibilities. The exhaustion. Dominic was not rewarding me. He was recognizing me. There is a difference. After a while I laughed quietly. Do you realize how strange this sounds? His eyebrows lifted. Very. A powerful businessman secretly helping a waitress because she worked on her birthday. He smiled. When you say it like that, it sounds ridiculous. I laughed again. So did he. The tension dissolved. For the first time, we were not a businessman and a former barista. We were simply two people having an honest conversation. As the afternoon sun shifted across the room, we continued talking. About work, family, books, community programs. Hours seemed to disappear. By the time the event ended, something had changed. Not because of the opportunities he created. Not because of the secrets I uncovered. Because understanding had replaced mystery. As we walked toward the exit together, Dominic opened the door and paused. Emily. I looked up. Yes. For a second he seemed almost uncertain. Then he said something I would remember for years. You deserved to be celebrated long before I met you. And as we stepped into the golden Manhattan evening, I realized that sometimes the most meaningful gift is not what someone gives you. It is the moment they finally make you feel seen. A year can change a life in ways a single day never could. The next time my birthday arrived, Manhattan looked exactly the same. The streets were still crowded. Yellow taxis still moved through traffic. People still hurried toward places they believed were important. Yet everything felt different. Because I was different. The woman who once stood behind a coffee shop counter counting tips and worrying about rent now spent her days helping build programs that changed lives. Ryan was doing better too. His second job was gone. His college courses were nearly finished. For the first time in years, neither of us was simply trying to stay afloat. We were moving forward. My birthday landed on a Saturday. I woke up expecting a quiet day. Maybe breakfast. Maybe a phone call from Ryan. Nothing extravagant. The lesson of the previous year had taught me not to expect too much from birthdays. Expectations can be dangerous things. They leave room for disappointment. Around 10 o'clock that morning my phone buzzed. A message from Dominic. We're something comfortable. Be ready at noon. That was all. No explanation. No clues. I laughed to myself. Over the past year, I had learned that Dominic enjoyed surprises almost as much as he enjoyed keeping secrets. At exactly noon, a black sedan stopped outside my apartment building. The same kind of car I remembered from that long ago night outside the coffee shop. When I climbed inside, Dominic was already there. Good afternoon, he said. You are smiling. That is because I have learned to be suspicious when you are smiling. He laughed quietly. The sound still surprised me every time. We drove across the city. Then beyond it. Nearly 45 minutes later, the car turned into a large community center surrounded by trees. I frowned. What is this? Dominic simply opened the door. The moment I stepped inside, I froze. The room was filled with people. Volunteers from our programs, colleagues, families we had helped, children from literacy events. Even Ryan stood near the front holding a camera and grinning like he had been keeping the secret for months. Colorful decorations filled the room. Tables overflowed with food. Music drifted through the air. For a second I could not speak. What did you do? I whispered. Dominic stood beside me. His expression was calm, almost cautious. I remembered. The words hit harder than I expected. Suddenly my eyes filled with tears. Not because of the decorations. Not because of the cake waiting near the stage. Because 1 year earlier, I had stood alone in a tiny apartment staring at a single candle on a cupcake. Now an entire room of people was smiling at me. Not because of luck. Because someone had decided I mattered. The celebration lasted for hours. Stories were shared. Laughter echoed through the building. Children pulled me into games. Friends filled my phone with photographs. Ryan embarrassed me repeatedly. It was perfect. As evening approached, the crowd slowly began leaving. Eventually only a handful of people remained. I stepped outside into the golden light of sunset. Dominic joined me near the entrance. For a while neither of us spoke. The breeze moved gently through the trees. Finally I looked at him. You know, last year I made a wish. His eyes met mine. What did you wish for? I smiled. I wished that somehow my next year would feel different. He glanced toward the building behind us. Then back at me. Looks like it worked. I laughed softly. So did he. As the sun disappeared beyond the horizon, I realized something important. The most valuable gifts are not money, or opportunities, or even celebrations. The most valuable gift is being seen when the world overlooks you. 1 year earlier I thought nobody noticed. I was wrong. Because sometimes a single person noticing your worth is enough to change the entire direction of your life. And sometimes that changes theirs too.